Welcome to Karma Ledger. Today's story is about a funeral with 56 chairs, an empty seat that said everything, and a will that turned revenge into a ledger with interest. There were 56 chairs set out for the service. I know because I counted them once while the organist found a sad key, again while cousins wept into tissues, and one more time when the eulogy started to sound like a press release. Karina, my wife, had insisted on the silver-trimmed folding kind. They photographed better, she said. Only 55 ended up occupied. The one beside her, my seat stayed empty by instruction. She told an usher not to put me there. It would complicate things. Complicated? The woman was burying her father while secretly texting her attorney about divorce filings. We had sprinted past complicated a long time ago. So I stood in the back, not with family, not even with the third cousins who only appear for weddings and caskets. I hovered by a ficus and a woman who once dated Karina's uncle in the 90s, clutching a program that misspelled my last name. No one offered me a chair. No one offered me a tissue. And when Karina rose to speak about her father, Glenn Darby, oil baron, a man who once told me I smelled like drywall, she never said my name. Not as a survivor, not in the thank yous, not even a stray glance to acknowledge the man she used to share a bed with. Black silk dress, heels sharp enough to puncture egos. She cried just enough to appear human, not enough to smudge mascara. When she sat back down, she leaned toward the stranger parked in my seat and whispered something that made him laugh. I didn't know who he was and didn't care, because the part of the story that matters doesn't happen in the church. It begins after, in a hallway that smelled like lilies and furniture polish, when Karina executed a move so small and deliberate it told me everything. She dropped her handkerchief right in front of me. I stooped to get it, reflex more than kindness, and caught a glimpse of a folded document sticking out of her clutch. My name in bold beside a case number. That's when the truth crystallized. Karina had filed the divorce before the funeral, before the flowers, before the eulogy. She was crying for a father who despised me while pretending she still loved me, and in 2 days, she'd be inheriting $250 million. 2 days after that, she would put a white envelope in my hand and say, "Wendell, I'm choosing myself." But the will had its own agenda. I didn't sleep the night before the reading. Not a minute. I lay on my cousin's pull-out sofa, listening to pipes clank and hum, wondering whether to show up at all. What would be the point? Karina already had everything: the house, the narrative, my dignity. When someone serves you divorce papers before the roses on her father's grave wilt, you stop expecting fairness from the planet. And yet that flash of bold text, my name attached to a legal proceeding, scratched at me like a hangnail you can't stop picking. Why would Glenn, a man who called me the lawn ornament, include me in anything? The estate sat on a private hill in Hampton Chase, wrapped in ironwork and rumor, the kind of address where even the wind smells expensive. I wasn't permitted through the front with the others. I was routed to a side door, the caterer's entrance poetry Glenn would have appreciated. A small group gathered in the study. Deep leather, animal heads on the walls, a grandfather clock that had probably ticked through 3 wars. Karina was already seated, slate gray dress this time. Mourning period apparently over. She looked at me with no anger and no pity. Just the bland, transactional calm you use with a leasing agent when you return a car. The man from the funeral sat beside her. I noticed his shoes first, glossy loafers with tiny gold tags. People only wear shoes like that when they want you to notice. I took the darkest corner of the room. The lawyer shuffled in, hugging a manila envelope like nuclear codes. He cleared his throat. As legal representative of the late Mr. Glenn Darby, I will now read his final instructions. Witnessed, notarized, and recorded 2 months before his passing. 2 months. The phrase landed like a brick. Glenn had updated the will recently, after his last family retreat. I remembered Karina going alone. "You'd be bored anyway," she'd said, tossing sunscreen into a suitcase. I had believed her. The attorney droned through the inventory. Rhode Island properties, a Paris apartment, 3 cars worth more than my childhood street, art by names I trip over. Then he reached the distribution. "To my daughter, Karina Elise Darby." She tilted her head like a queen awaiting her crown. "I leave the sum of $1 million to be managed by the family trust, under the oversight of Mr. Bradley Vaughn." Karina blinked once. "Did you mean 100 million? Silence saturated the air. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. 1 million. The remainder will transfer to another beneficiary, as outlined in this letter. He opened a sealed envelope, Glenn's handwriting on the front, and read, "If you're hearing this, Karina, I am likely gone. I watched you change. Not over years, but in weeks. You stopped visiting unless there was a camera. You brought that man into my home and laughed behind my back. I am not a fool. You loved the inheritance more than you loved your father. My money will not be your reward." Karina's mouth opened, but no sound arrived. The lawyer continued, "To the man who married my daughter, knowing she would one day despise him. To the man who tolerated my cruelty with dignity and stayed even when he should have left. Wendell Thomas Carr. I leave the remainder of my estate." Time stuttered. Breathing felt optional. Karina stared at me like I'd sprouted antlers. The man beside her stood up as if the chair had become electric. I didn't want this. I wanted my marriage, my cat, my slow Sunday mornings. But want was irrelevant. I had just become heir to $250 million. And the woman who left me was suddenly fascinated by the carpet. I left before the paperwork ended. I needed air, distance, a scream, a laugh, a place to be sick, preferably all at once. Karina's heels scraped marble behind me. "Wendell!" I kept walking, past the fountain, out the gates. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one being left. I walked for more than an hour, not because I lacked a ride. Movement was the only thing preventing me from detonating. Every tree alongside the road felt like it leaned in to whisper. I didn't want the money. I wanted a time machine. I wanted to shake the 6 months ago me who ignored the new perfume. The phone flipped face down. The line, "You wouldn't understand the world I come from." Back at my cousin's, I sat on the edge of that awful sofa staring at a plastic plant, while his kid watched a cartoon with animals piloting airplanes. All I could hear was Glenn's voice, "To the man who stayed when he should have left." I hadn't known he ever saw me. Me behind the jokes. Sleep didn't visit that night either, but the emotion had shifted from shock to fear. I wasn't built for zeros. My life had been coupons and bulk ramen and calculating gas money. I didn't know how to talk to lawyers. What do you do with that kind of wealth when last week you couldn't afford the fancy peanut butter? Karina, of course, knew exactly what to do. She waited outside the depot where I worked. Yes, I still clocked in. What else was I going to do? Buy an island on Tuesday? She leaned against her BMW like she hadn't gutted our life and walked out. Her expression wasn't sorrow. It was hunger-polished, strategic hunger. "We need to talk," she said, sliding sunglasses into her hair like a courtroom actor. "No, we really don't." She followed me inside, past my supervisor, pinning me near the break room. She stood close enough that her vanilla lotion our lotion flooded my head with muscle memory. For one foolish second, I remembered waking next to her and thinking I'd won at life. Then she said, "You don't deserve this, Wendell." No apology, no guilt, just that. I laughed, because otherwise my hands were going to shake. "A symbol? That's all I was to you?" You were a mistake that lasted too long. The words landed like a hammer on bone. She pulled a thick folder from her bag tabs and highlighter scars. A revised proposal, she said. Division of estate assets. You don't need all of it. You'll lose it. Let's be realistic. Walk away with dignity before you embarrass both of us. I didn't take the folder. My fists were already full of shame. Half of me believed her. I didn't belong in that world. The other half, quiet, stubborn, whispered that maybe Glenn had recognized a thing Karina never did. Staying isn't always weakness. She clicked away in heels, confident I'd call like always. I didn't. For the first time in our history, I had something she wanted. Leverage. By week's end, my life felt counterfeit. I still punched a clock. I still ate off-brand cereal in a borrowed basement. Karina still texted, not begging. Karina never begs, but negotiating. Let's be smart. We can avoid dragging this out. Think of the media. The media as if the world cared about a guy who once fixed a neighbor's dryer for leftover barbecue. Then one of Glenn's estate attorneys called, not the old bull from the reading, but a younger voice with a nervous edge. Mr. Carr, there are supplemental documents you should review. In a trembling glass tower I once assumed wasn't for people like me. A receptionist ignored me, and a leather couch cost more than my first car. In a conference room, they slid me a sealed folder and left. Inside, under my name in bold, sat a section labeled Addendum, Conditions of Inheritance. Glenn, it turned out, wasn't only bitter. He was surgical. Nearly 40 of the estate sat locked in trust under my name with a detonator. The trust would not activate unless I remained divorced from Karina for 18 consecutive months. If I re-entered a relationship with her in any form, that portion would be forfeited to brace yourself, a dog sanctuary for abandoned animals. I read it 3 times. Glenn had built a clause that punished me if I ever crawled back. It wasn't just money. It was a message, a loyalty test from beyond the grave. A scanned handwritten note waited at the end. Wendell, if you're tempted to return to the cage, remember you were never the pet. She only knew how to feed you. Don't let her leash you again. G.D. The same man who mocked me for folding his daughter's laundry had just declared me worthy of freedom. All I had to do was stay away. I should have felt grateful. Instead, I felt sick. Karina hadn't changed. She'd only pivoted. This wasn't about love. It was about strategy. She wasn't wooing me. She was defusing a bomb her father had wired. That night, I ignored her call. The next morning, she sat outside my cousin's place again. Same car, same coat. This time, no folder. Red eyes, messy hair, almost human. Have you read the documents? She asked. Silence. That clause is humiliating, she snapped. He's laughing at us from the grave. Pretty sure he's laughing at you, I said before I could stop myself. A crack appeared in her armor. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I laughed, exhausted, jagged. You filed before the flowers wilted. You were going to collect the money and the guy in blue loafers and call it a day. She looked like she might cry, but nothing arrived. I realized with a fresh kind of dread that maybe she couldn't. Not pride absence. She tried one last trick, an old photograph from our early days. Plastic wine glasses by a lake, her head on my chest. I keep this, she said. You weren't just a stepping stone. I left the photo on the porch. Rain warped it that night, the way time warps a story you wish you could forget. I thought that might be the end. Karina never loses quietly. 3 days later, an unmarked envelope appeared in the mailbox. There are things you don't know, Wendell. Be careful who you trust with Glenn's secrets. No signature. At first I thought prank. Then I thought Karina. But the tone wasn't hers. Karina demands. She doesn't warn. So I dug into every folder the lawyers had given me, the ones I'd barely glanced at. Buried in a miscellaneous correspondence packet, sat printed emails from Glenn's private server. Most were housekeeping. One thread turned the room cold. Subject: Re. Karina's request. Urgency noted. A woman named Whitley wrote, "Document destruction requires sign-off from all trustees. At this time, only one signature has been received. We will not proceed without the second." Timestamp: 2 weeks before Glenn died. A prior message revealed what she'd tried to erase. Addendum C, disqualification clause. No law degree required. Karina had attempted to delete the very clause that held her at arm's length. The next morning I called the attorney. He sounded resigned. "Yes, Mr. Carr. She contacted us. Nothing was altered. The clause stands." So she knew. She knew before the funeral, before the dropped handkerchief, before the white envelope. The nostalgia, the soft voice, the sudden visits. It was all damage control. Her voicemail that night was thin steel. "You're just a placeholder, Wendell. I lived under his rules my whole life. I deserve a peace. You don't really want to punish me like this." I saved it. Not for proof. Just to remember who she is when she thinks nobody's listening. But emails weren't the end. There were security logs, asset lists, and one file dated 3 days before Glenn's death labeled Library, July 10. The estate manager begrudged me access after a week of paperwork. The guards nodded now. The marble lion seemed to stand taller. Strange what a signature can do. The library hid behind a door I'd never been allowed to cross. A staffer named Horace guided me to a false panel and handed me a brass key. Inside a velvet box lay a single flash drive. Library, July 10th. Final record. I watched the footage alone with the curtains drawn. A fixed camera, no sound bed. 5 minutes of quiet truth. Karina, not mourning, not composed pacing. Phone in hand, voice sharp. "You have no right to do this. You want to die smiling knowing you've taken everything from me?" Glenn sat behind the desk, exhaustion for a mask. "You made your choice," he said. "You left him before I was gone." "So what? You were halfway in the grave." He lifted a hand. "And yet, I lived long enough to rewrite the will." Her face twitched, panic with a gloss. "You thought you could keep the freedom and the fortune," he continued. "But there are consequences. You treated love like leverage. Wendell never asked me for anything. Never took a dime, even when I pushed him." The video ended on Glenn's tired eyes. It wasn't triumphant. It hurt. Because some naive corner of me had hoped she'd cared, even once. There was more. Inside the folders waited a medical memo in a sealed envelope, to be read after death. Glenn's handwriting again. "If this reaches you, Wendell, you did not give in to Karina." Good. I am not confessing, only writing what I believe. I doubt I will die by nature alone. Before the retreat, I was healthy. After her visit, I suffered chest pains and dizzy spells. She offered a tea from a cleanse. I vomited and never drank it again. I told no one. What father wants to suspect his daughter of trying to speed the inheritance? If I did not go peacefully, do not let her walk away untouched. Not proof. A suspicion etched by a man who counted people for a living. Horace showed me the entry logs. During that final weekend, Karina entered the private quarters 7 times between midnight and 4 a.m. Guests never had access without invitation. Glenn did not invite people at midnight. 7 times. Still not criminal evidence, but enough to assemble a picture. Karina's desperation wasn't grief. It was fear that I'd discover the timeline she had tried to set. So I called her. "I've seen the library footage," I said, "and the letter." Silence. "You're not supposed to have that," she breathed. "Right. The way you weren't supposed to be in his room 7 times after midnight." "What do you want?" she asked, finally skipping the theater. "Nothing. No money. No silence. no protection. You're going to spend the next year jumping when the doorbell rings." Her voice fractured. I hung up. For the first time in my life, I felt steady. I didn't run to the police. I moved carefully. Hired Glenn's longtime private investigator. Turns out he already had a file. Pharmacy receipts, wellness shop purchases, date-stamped cleansing powders. When the estate attorneys saw it, the machine woke up. It never became criminal. It didn't need to. The estate filed civil actions, will interference, attempted destruction of protected documents, tampering with a trust. In court, Glenn's voice traveled through paper and pixels. The claws held. Karina walked in, confident she could claw something back. She left with nothing. The judge honored the trust, the addendum, the footage, the handwritten note. Her would-be share was frozen and then diverted to charities Glenn had listed as alternates for moral compromise within the family. She appealed twice. The court sided with the evidence twice. The empire Glenn built settled where he'd pointed it. And me? I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't flee to Paris. I rented a modest place near a lake, adopted 2 old dogs from the very sanctuary Glenn named. Yes, Captain Pickles is real, and I show up there on Saturdays to hose down kennels and hand out biscuits. Funny how a clause written like a trap became the first peaceful rule I've ever lived by. I learned how to file estate taxes, how to take a call from a lawyer without sweating through a shirt, how to sleep without jolting awake at 2 a.m. to check whether she was texting someone else. People ask if I'm angry, if I miss her. I miss the idea of her. The woman I kept pretending existed beneath the ambition and contempt. Missing a ghost isn't wanting it back. A while ago, an envelope arrived. No return address, messy handwriting, a single sentence. "You ruined everything." I didn't keep it. The dogs chewed it into confetti on the kitchen floor. Because she's wrong. I didn't ruin everything. I saved what was left of me.